Hello, my name is Romy Gutierrez, and I'm the director of the University Press of Florida. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar. Our first panel today, Getting Published, is part of a virtual event series made possible by Sustaining the Humanities through the American Rescue Plan grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. We would like to thank the National Endowment for the Humanities for its generous support. We would also like to thank our event partners at the University of Florida, the African American Studies Program, the Center for Latin American Studies, and the Center for the Humanities in the Public Sphere. In this morning's panel, we will discuss the book publishing process in detail from the perspective of both authors and editors. This presentation will be helpful for those who are or may soon be interested in publishing their work with the University Press. This afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll be hosting a second panel titled Career Paths in Humanities, Public Engagement, and Publishing. If you are interested in joining us for that panel as well, please click the link in the chat to register, and you will receive information on how to join via email. And now a few pointers and guidelines for this panel. This webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available on our YouTube channel, Florida Press. Registrants will receive an email with a link to the recording. Closed captioning has been enabled. To view the closed captioning, please click on Closed Caption in your meeting controls. You are welcome to submit questions for the panelists through the Q&A, and we will try to address questions as time allows. We would also love to hear from you after the webinar. We will share contact information for University Press of Florida editors during the presentation, and we hope you will reach out to them with any questions you may have. So, thank you again for joining us for this discussion about how to get your work published. I'll briefly discuss the University Press of Florida and what we do before turning the presentation over to our editor-in-chief, Stephanye Hunter, to discuss University Press publishing more generally and the publishing process itself in more detail. After Stephanie's presentation, we'll be joined in conversation by UPF authors Jorge Duany, professor of anthropology at Florida International University and director of the Cuban Research Institute, and Darius Young, associate professor of history at Florida A&M University. The University Press of Florida was first established as the University of Florida Press in 1945, and it would eventually become the publishing arm of the state university system as UPF. As a consortium university press, the copyright page of each book published under the University Press of Florida imprint features 11 state universities, and our editorial board is comprised of one distinguished scholar from each of these 11 universities. The mission of the State University System Press is to serve the system, its universities, and the diverse communities of the state. Building on the success of decades of collaboration with the University of Florida, the UF Press imprint was reimagined in 2015 as a separate imprint to publish works of high caliber reflecting the research strengths of UF. This imprint also has an advisory board composed of distinguished faculty from various departments at UF. Under these two imprints, our mission is to produce works of global significance, regional importance, and lasting value. There are three primary components to our publishing program: books, which we'll return to in a couple of minutes with our editor-in-chief, Stephanye Hunter; our journals program, which was established in 2015 as part of the UF Press imprint and features 10 active journals, including Bioarchaeology International, Rhetoric of Health and Medicine, the Journal of Global Postcolonial Studies, and Subtropics, the literary journal of the University of Florida. Through our publication services division, the press extends its expertise in editorial, book design, typesetting, digital book production, warehousing, and distribution to clients who might have need of such services, but whose projects may not meet the criteria of a university press book. These might be projects specific to a department at one of the universities, something like symposia proceedings or a volume celebrating a milestone or anniversary, or an exhibition catalog for a museum. If you have questions about our journals program or our publication services division, please feel free to contact me. And with that, I'll turn this presentation over to our editor-in-chief, Stephanye Hunter, to discuss the topic everyone is here for, getting published.
Thank you, Romy. All right, so we're going to talk about books today. The press publishes books in multiple subject areas and for several different audiences. Let's talk about subjects first. Because most university presses are smaller and have limited resources, they focus those resources on specific subject areas. Not all presses will publish books in your subject area, so it's important to look for the presses who do. We'll come back to this a little bit later. For now, I want to highlight the subject areas that Florida publishes in: archaeology, history, African American studies, literature, dance, space, Latin American studies, and sustainability. And we also publish books on Florida, of course, like Florida gardening, art, architecture, foodways, music, photography, and history. In addition to multiple subjects, we publish for multiple audiences. Let's look at the mission statement of the press that Romy read to us earlier, which is to serve the SUS, its universities, and the diverse communities of the state. To fulfill this mission, we publish books for different readers. On the screen, you'll see 4 books that we published recently that reach these different audiences. On the far left, Women Making Modernism, a book written for scholars who are specialists in the field. Urban Ecology for Citizens and Planners is an example of a book written for the second audience, practitioners. These can include activists, policymakers, and journalists. Books like the Forensic Anthropology Lab Manual are for student use in courses. And finally, books like The Cuban Sandwich are for general readers. These books tend to be written in a more accessible style and on a subject that is going to be of larger interest. Now, the reason why I think most of you are watching this is because you want to find out how to get published. So we're going to walk through the publication process of publishing a book with Florida. I'll be using our life cycle of the book diagram, which is available on our website, and Sean's going to post a link to that in the chat so you can reference it later. So this process is going to be very similar to other university presses, but if you're working with a specific press, I recommend you talk to your acquisitions editor at that press about their process. There may be some differences that you should know about. All projects start with acquisitions. Acquisitions editors learn about potential book projects and decide which are the best fit for their press. Each acquisitions editor focuses on just a few disciplines, and we have several ways of learning about book projects. Acquisitions editors are active in their fields. We attend conferences, we read journals and conference programs, we follow associations and scholars on social media. And we will often reach out to a scholar who we think is doing some interesting work that might be a good fit for the press. In addition, you can let us know about your book project. Presses have a general email where you can submit an inquiry. This email will be forwarded to the relevant acquisitions editor. When a press is interested in your work, the editor will ask you to submit a full book proposal. A proposal is a critical document that will be read by your editor to help them understand and advocate for your book. Throughout the publication process, a book is a cooperative venture between the author and the press. The proposal is the first step in this joint venture. After reading the proposal, if the editor thinks your book is a good fit for their press, the proposal might be shared with other members of the press or with series editors or external reviewers. So most proposals follow the format that I have on the screen, but be sure to check if there are any specific requirements for a press that you're considering. And make sure to tailor your proposal to that individual press. These are the common components of a proposal. First is the summary. Your summary should be as clear as possible. It should have a hook. You should tell the reader, why is this interesting? Why does this subject matter? Be sure to explain the project's contribution. How is it advancing the field? How is it furthering the scholarly conversation? Next is the intended audience. You as authors should have a clear understanding of who you're writing for. Your audience will impact how you write your book. And as I showed previously, presses publish for different audiences. This section of the proposal helps that press decide if they can help your book reach its readers. When they're reading your proposal, editors will be asking, are your audience expectations realistic? Will your audience be interested in this topic? Is your writing suitable for the intended audience? And does my press publish books for that audience? The next section is comparable books. Claiming your book is the only book on the subject is not very helpful to your editor. It is helpful to include books with similar topics, a similar audience, or similar methodology. This helps the editor understand the landscape for your project. And I recommend including books that have been published recently, up to 5 years. Also, if the press that you're submitting a proposal to has a book that's similar to yours, definitely include it in the proposal. That strengthens your case that your book is a good fit for that press. The proposal should include specifications like word length, number of images, and also your anticipated schedule for submitting the manuscript. Next is the annotated table of contents, which is a really important part of the proposal. It's a list of chapters with short summaries, but it shows the editor how your chapters build on each other to work toward the larger argument that you have identified in your summary. Finally, you should include a writing sample, which should probably be your most polished chapter, and a copy of your CV. So one question I get a lot is the best time for submitting a proposal. And this is really going to vary project by project. I recommend submitting a proposal when you have a clear idea of the structure of your book and a solid timeline for completing it. At that point, you can start discussing it with editors. Sean is going to post a link to our submission instructions and our proposal guidelines on our website if you're interested in submitting a proposal to Florida. And if you want more information on proposals, I highly recommend the Book Proposal book by Laura Portwood Stacer. It's very thorough, has a lot of great resources and some templates as well. Before moving forward, I want to talk for a moment about revising dissertations. Except in rare cases, a dissertation will need significant revision to become a book. The first step in revising your dissertation is to take a step back from it. You've likely been working on it for several years. It's time to take a break. When you're ready, return to your project with fresh eyes. There are 3 important differences between a dissertation and a book manuscript. First is the audience. Your dissertation was written for your committee, a small number of experts in your field. In contrast, the book needs to be written for a large audience. Even if you're writing for a scholarly audience, these aren't all going to be experts on your subject. Identify your audience and adjust your writing and contribution to suit. Next is voice. Speak with authority. The goal of the dissertation is to prove to your committee that you are an expert on the subject. If a press chooses to invest in your book, the reader knows you are an expert. You don't need to prove this to us. This means reducing and repurposing your literature review. Instead of summarizing the scholarly field, for example, you will want to reformulate to focus on what you are saying. Your argument should be central. Use other scholarship to support your argument. And finally, the structure. You may need to reorganize your chapters or add additional chapters based on further research. It can be helpful to look for books with successful structures to serve as a model for your own. There's a number of good resources on revising a dissertation. I really like William Germano's From Dissertation to Book, but there's quite a bit out there. Okay, so back to the publication process. You've submitted your proposal. If your editor agrees that the project is a good fit for the press, they will invite a full manuscript. Some presses may have the option of offering an advance contract before the manuscript is complete. If an advance contract would be helpful for you for job applications, tenure, or promotion, let your editor know. Be sure to let your editor know of any schedule or deadlines requirements that you have related to promotion and tenure. When your manuscript is complete, you'll send it to the editor. You and your editor may agree to submit a few chapters at a time for feedback. That's something you'll want to work out with your individual editor. You may decide to send the whole manuscript at once. When the editor has the full manuscript, they will send it out for peer review. Peer review is one of the cornerstones of university press publishing. It is a scholarly conversation facilitated by your editor with the shared goal of making your book the best it can be. Reviewers provide thoughtful, thorough suggestions. Peer review is a service based in reciprocity, generosity, and commitment to the field. So a little bit about the process of peer review. Once they have your manuscript, your editor will select 2 or 3 experts in your field to provide reviews. Editors might ask you for recommendations. Who do you think would provide a constructive review? You should not suggest friends, members of your dissertation committee, or members of your graduate cohort. Editors will be looking for stringent reviews, fair critiques, and constructive suggestions. We'll typically ask the reviewers to submit their reviews within 2 to 3 months, but this timeline can vary based on the reviewer's schedule. When your editor has received all the reviews, they will send them to you with an email outlining the main points. We read a lot of reviews, so this email is meant to help explain and provide context. This email and the reviews are part of the conversation between you and your editor about how to make the book better. Your editor will then ask you to write a letter responding to the reviews. This letter helps you articulate your revision plan to the editor. It's also included in the packet of materials presented to the faculty editorial board, which we'll talk about in just a minute. It's important that the letter show that you have engaged with the reviews and given them careful thought. It doesn't need to go into every detail, but it should address the reviewer comments and the revision plan in broad strokes. If a reviewer feels an area of your manuscript is weak, that deserves your attention. You may decide not to follow the exact suggestion from the reviewer, but revising to address reviewer concerns is an opportunity to make your book better. Based on the reviews, your editor may determine that your manuscript needs revision and further peer review before it can move on. In this case, you and your editor will agree on a revision plan and a timeline for submitting the revised manuscript. Once you've submitted the revised manuscript, your editor will send it back out to peer reviewers. These are often, but not always, the same reviewers who read it previously. Once the project has received sufficiently positive peer reviews, it is ready to move forward to the faculty editorial board. The editorial board is the second cornerstone of university press publishing. Your editor will present your project to the board for final publication approval. The board is made up of faculty from the institutions represented by the press. And this faculty is going to come from a variety of disciplines, so they're not all going to be experts or familiar with your field. Your editor will give the board a summary of your project and its key contributions. They will send the peer reviews and your letter of response to the board members in advance of the meeting. The role of the faculty editorial board is to review the peer review process. They make sure that each editor has done their job by soliciting appropriate reviewers and that the author has sufficiently addressed reviewer concerns. Once the board has approved your project for publication, you and your editor will work to get all the files in. This includes the final text with all revisions, the images, permissions, and any other documents. At that point, the project launches to editorial, design, and production, or EDP. This is where the disparate pieces become a book. The EDP process is a series of steps that must happen in a certain order and on a specific schedule. At this point, the press has set and announced the publication date of your book. Meeting deadlines are critical for making this publication date. A project editor will be your main point of contact through the EDP process. The press enlists a copy editor for the project, and the copy editing process is coordinated by this project editor. The copy editor will correct spelling and grammar errors, check citation style, and help improve the clarity of sentences. Once the project has been copy edited, the project editor will transmit the manuscript to the production team. They will typeset and design the project. This is when it finally starts to look like a book. The design pages that look like a book are called page proofs. Authors are usually responsible for proofreading these pages. This is your last chance to correct typos or other small errors. The author is also usually responsible for creating an index. Instead of doing the proofreading and indexing yourself, you may prefer to hire a professional proofreader and indexer. I tell my authors, if you have access to publication funds through your institution, this is a good use for them. Once all the corrections have been made, the project is sent to the printer. In full, the EDP process takes about 10 to 12 months from the transmittal of the project to editorial to holding the book in your hands. Now, while the book is in EDP, the marketing department is already at work spreading word about it. The marketing department gathers blurbs, and they write descriptive copy about your book. They also prepare and release metadata, which is information about your book that makes it discoverable at online retailers and on the press website. The marketing team will likely ask you to complete an author questionnaire. This will let you note specific opportunities for marketing your book. You as author are an important part in promoting the book. Our marketing department will want to coordinate their efforts with you. Now, there are 2 seasons in publishing, spring and fall. Your book will be announced to the book industry in one of these 2 seasons. We also give tailored attention to promoting your book according to its specific audience. For general interest books, there may be focus on bookstore events, book festivals, and social media. We may submit these books for awards or pitch them to national media outlets, such as the New York Times and NPR. The marketing plan for scholarly books is a little bit different. We send review copies of these books to academic journals, we take them to conferences, we submit them to awards, promote them to scholarly associations, and share information on social media. We publish our books in multiple formats based on their intended audiences and how they will be used, including hardcover, paperback, digital edition for libraries, and digital editions for e-readers. We have further suggestions on how you can help promote your book on our website. Sean's going to put that link in the chat for us. So now that we've gone through the publishing process, let's talk about some resources. The University Press of Florida is a member of the Association of University Presses, an organization of more than 150 international nonprofit scholarly publishers. AU Presses has some great resources available for current and prospective authors. Their address is on the screen, but I wanted to point out 2 resources in particular. The first is Ask Up, which stands for Authors Seeking Knowledge from University Presses. Ask Up is a website created and hosted by University Presses. It is comprised of a series of FAQs on a wide range of subjects about publishing. You can find a lot of great information there, and more information is added regularly. And if your question is not already asked on this website, you can submit it, and the press hosting the website at that time will post an answer. The second resource I want to point you to is the subject area grid. Earlier, I mentioned that presses specialize in specific subjects. There are a few ways to find presses active in your field. First, look for publishers who publish the books you use for research. Look at which presses advertise and attend your main conferences. Another resource is the subject area grid. So across the top, the grid has a list of every member of AU Presses, and then it indicates which fields they are actively publishing in. You may be able to use this grid to find presses that you weren't aware of. When you are researching presses, take advantage of opportunities to talk to acquisitions editors. Editors specialize in specific disciplines, but we also have specific topics within those disciplines that we would like to develop. For example, I acquire in Latin American studies, and among other topics, I'm interested in book projects related to the environmental issues. We also just recently started a series on race and history in the Caribbean. If you are at a conference, talk to the editors. Ask them what they're looking for and see if they're interested in your project. This is a great way to make first contact with an editor and to learn more about their press and its process. You could also follow editors on social media, see what they're publishing and what they're excited about. Next, we're going to turn to our discussion with 2 of our authors, moderated by Senior Acquisitions Editor Sian Hunter. And Sean, I'm going to let you introduce our panelists.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's my honor to introduce today our 2 guest speakers who are going to share some of their publishing experiences and perspectives and then join us in conversation. With us today is Dr. Jorge Duany, who is professor of anthropology at Florida International University, where he is also director of the Cuban Research Institute. He earned his PhD in Latin American Studies from the University of California at Berkeley, and his research focuses on migration, race, nationalism, and transnationalism in Cuba, the Caribbean, and the United States. Dr. Duany has authored or co-edited over 20 books, including Cuba and Puerto Rico, Transdisciplinary Approaches to History, Literature, and Culture, and Picturing Cuba, Art, Culture, and Identity on the Island and in the Diaspora. His scholarly articles have been published in American Anthropologist, Latin American Research Review, and the Annals of the American Academy of Political and Social Science, among other academic journals. He is currently the principal investigator for a 3-year fellowship program funded by the Mellon Foundation, Cuban Scholars in the Humanities. We also appreciate Dr. Darius Young joining us today. Dr. Young is Associate Professor of History at Florida A&M University, where he also serves as the Quality Enhancement Plan Director, and he is Florida A&M's University Representative Member to the UPF's Editorial Board. Dr. Young earned his PhD in United States history from the University of Memphis, and his research areas focus on Black history and Black political movements in the 20th century. Dr. Young is the author of Robert R. Church Jr. and the African American Political Struggle, which won the 2020 C. Calvin Smith Book Award from the Southern Conference on African American Studies. He has published a number of scholarly articles and book reviews in prominent journals, such as the Journal of African American History, the Journal of Southern History, Black Perspectives, and the Journal of American History. He's currently working on a new book manuscript about Black Detroit and the Revolutionary Year of 1963. So Dr. Young, I'm going to ask you to lead us off in this section with your comments, and then Dr. Duany will follow. Dr. Young.
All right. Well, thank you, Sian, for the introduction. I do want to extend my thanks to everyone at UPF for this invitation, and I really look forward to the conversation. Just to kind of talk about my journey during this publishing process, I think I met Sian several years ago through a past board member and my mentor, David Jackson, who first established that connection with Sian and really started to build that relationship. I think I became serious about moving forward with the book project after I attended the Southern Historical Association back in 2016. And I think we had coffee and I kind of talked about my research, my approach, different things that I was arguing in that book. And, I thought it would be a great fit. And just to everyone who's interested in learning that process, I really stress the importance of attending conferences. You have a lot of editors who will reach out just based on the topics that they see in those conference programs, but also approaching editors at presses that represents work very similar to yours, right? So I knew about work from Simon Topping, who was doing work on like these Black Republican that during the early 20th century, and Manfred Berg and the NAACP. Like those were some of those books that were very similar to the work that I was looking at, but also do your research, right? One of the things that I didn't know is in thinking about whether or not we're going to move forward with University Press of Florida, I started asking colleagues, and I reached back out. I don't know if I ever told you this, Sean. I reached back out to my major professor at University of Memphis, Aaron Gazouzian. And I said, I'm thinking about going with UPF and this and that. And he said, oh, who's the editor? I said, Sian Hunter. He said, well, she's pretty good because she helped get me published. She was my editor at another press, which we won't talk about today, right? And so it's important to have those conversations to network and to really build relationships with the editor because you're going to be working closely with that person for several years. I started in 2016, the book came out in 2019, and Sian helped me through that process. And as a first-time author, it was extremely helpful to have someone like Sian in your corner, helping to craft your work to make it the best project that it can possibly be. And for someone who probably never thought about publishing as an author when you first enter college and you think about your career, to have someone like that who can hold your hand and really trust to give you the type of insight, advice to help you through that process was really invaluable. All of that is well and good, but there's also some technical pieces to that, right? Where I'm at an HBCU, so we have a heavy teaching load. And I could tell you just during those 3 years in particular, had to be extremely disciplined. I had to really think about some of the things that Stephanie mentioned earlier in terms of moving my dissertation into this book phase, crafting it, thinking about the characters and all these different stories that you want to tell in a biography like that, which was extremely important. Edit that dissertation down to get to your subject, all this advice that I was getting from Sian. And I could tell you that it's extremely important because what I know now on the other side of the process as a board member is how Stephanie and Sian and all of the acquisition editors have to, in a sense, stand on the table for these projects and really be able to speak with authority that this book has been through a rigorous process and that they are confident that it's going to be accepted as a standard in the field, right? So, I mean, it was just extremely rewarding process for me, to say the least. And I could tell you that after the book was published, me at little old FAMU, right, have had a lot of opportunities now that I'm in a different conversation with my peers at other academic institutions, and have started to develop at least a little bit of a reputation as someone who's doing work on these Black political movements, and have found myself in spaces that I didn't imagine prior to publishing the book. So, I mean, it's rewarding on multiple levels, right? For my mother, she's just so happy that my name is on a book, and her name, I should probably say, is in the acknowledgements, right? But as an academic, it has been an extremely rewarding process. And I'm here to answer any questions that anyone may have, just in terms of the technical pieces that you have to go through in order to get to that process. I would just say, be selfish with your time, be disciplined as a writer. Don't think that you have to write the perfect sentence or construct the perfect paragraph throughout the entire process. I distinguish between writing and editing very much, right? That I will write to get what I need to get out, but also have the discipline to continue to edit your work. And really just be diligent and crafting that book to be the best representation. Be willing to have that conversation with these anonymous editors who are also providing great insight in terms of how you can make your book the best possible, right? And so again, for me, this is the second time I think we've had this conversation. It's an extremely important conversation, but I enjoy it so much because it allows me to reflect on that process and motivates me to keep going as well, and to answer any questions for anyone who may have questions about publishing specifically on the University Press of Florida. So I'll stop there now, Sian, and I look forward to engaging with you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Young. Dr. Duany?
Yes, and I want to join my colleague Darius Young in thanking the press and everyone involved in this event. And especially I want to thank Stephanye Hunter because we have been working together on a couple of books for a few years now. So thank you, Stephanie. So I'm going to reflect on my experience in publishing 2 books that were mentioned in the beginning. The most recent one is an edited volume called Cuba and Puerto Rico, Transdisciplinary Approaches to History, Literature, and Culture. And the previous book was picturing Cuba, art, culture, and identity on the island and diaspora. I also just remember that I had published another book co-authored with Jose Covas on Cubans in Puerto Rico way back in the 90s. This book is out of print, but it is also, of course, informed my choice of the press as a possible venue for these other two books. So focusing on the latter two, I want to begin by noting that both are based on academic events that we organized here at FIU's Cuban Research Institute in the past few years. Although, as an asterisk, I was told not to mention this fact in writing, at least, because edited volumes don't seem to be bestsellers, and especially when you have a lot of conference proceedings. However, and we didn't mention that in the acknowledgments or anywhere in the book, but I think that both books do have a general theme and a running argument throughout that makes it interesting. At least I think as an editor, but that's what I look for when I see multi-authored volumes. And so this one in particular, the last book on Cuba, Puerto Rico, I do think has a running argument, and that the authors dialogue with each other. I mean, that's I think what we can expect from this kind of work. Also, I wanted to emphasize from the start that both are interdisciplinary in nature, even in the subtitle of Cuba and Puerto Rico, transdisciplinary, which includes especially several disciplines in the social sciences, anthropology, sociology, political science, and then the humanities, literary criticism, art history, and other disciplines. And that's both a challenge as well as, I think, as an asset of these books, because as Stephanie was saying earlier, it sort of broadens the scope of your audience, and it's not just a particular group of experts, but actually people who enjoy reading about literature and history and culture from various perspectives. Now, the challenge is, of course, that to sort of reconcile these different disciplines, different styles, and different even citation styles is a challenge. And as an editor, I can share that it's a lot of work, a lot of painstaking work to provide some sort of consistency, which again, you know, different chapters have to follow a common structure, particularly in the citations. But once you have that solved, I think you have a lot of ground covered. In the last book, for Cuba and Puerto Rico, my co-editor, Carmen Rivera, actually suggested that we use MLA, and I think that was a pain. It wasn't very easy to adopt, especially for people like myself as anthropologists who have used other kinds of citation systems. But I think in the end, you know, again, you do find that consistency and some uniformity, not in the arguments themselves or the points of view, but actually in the style is important. I want to then also talk about some of the challenges, which in fact I have hinted at, that these books presented. Some of them are common, I think, to edited volumes, and others are more particular to this particular type of book. Which again involves collaborating with a lot of different authors, 16 in Picture in Cuba, 18 in Cuba and Puerto Rico. So if you like to work with colleagues and you enjoy the correspondence, etc., this is the thing to do. If you don't like it, you better write it on your own, because it's going to be, again, a long and complicated process. So I basically have structured my comments following the steps that Stephanie mentioned before, from the original conferences that we put together, inviting people that we thought would be, you know, good contributors to the overall theme, and then of course selecting them and recruiting them. Not all the papers that I wanted to include in, for example, Picture in Cuba were available, even though I pestered some of the authors and wrote them several times, and I never got anything back from them. There's also a problem, of course, of revising the papers themselves. You know, it's one thing to present it in a conference or a seminar, and quite another to have have it ready for publication. And in fact, some papers never become articles or chapters. I mentioned already the question of style and the format, which I think is important. You just can't have, you know, 15 different chapters with sort of different kinds of perspectives on in terms of how you actually write the paper. Sometimes you also include a common bibliography at the end. In this case, we decided not to. We decided to do you know, this works cited for each one of the chapters because they were so different in topic and approach. And then of course, the process of submitting the proposal in the case of edited volumes, I think is different from when you have full control as a single author, because again, you are sort of vouching for these various people, and then you have to serve as an intermediary between the acquisitions editor, the reviewers, and the authors themselves. You go back and forth several times, and again, with 15 or 20 authors with different schedules and different habits, sometimes I would get very quick responses to some of my collaborators. Sometimes, they take forever, and I was quite impatient. And of course, we have to meet the deadlines that everyone has, as well as the press. Eventually, we submitted the entire manuscript for peer review, and then when we got back some of the comments, it was our task as editors or co-editors to go back to the authors and tell them, this is what we got. See how you want to handle them. And in most cases, that I think was a productive stage of the process. In a few cases, I remember it was quite complicated because some of the authors did not like the reviewers' comments, and they spend more time responding to reviewers than actually making the changes. And again, that's not very productive. At the end of the process, once the two manuscripts were accepted by the press, then I think the fun part is becoming more clearly. We had to select the title, we had to choose a cover, and then in both cases we had to negotiate some of our preferences. For example, I remember the original title of the Picture in Cuba book we thought was going to be A Movable Nation, but the press told us you can't sell that. And so we decided to use Picture in Cuba, which I think is the correct marketing decision. And I chose to use Movable Nation in the introduction. Similarly, for the Cuba and Puerto Rico volume, we had in mind the famous phrase that actually titled the conference, the original conference, which is Two Wings of a Bird. That's a reference to a famous poem by a Puerto Rican author, Lola Rodriguez de Yo. But again, it didn't make it through the marketing process. So we decided to use a more neutral, less exciting perhaps, but more understandable title, Cuba, Puerto Rico. And now we're in the process, especially in the last case of promoting and presenting the book. We've had a couple of presentations already, both here in Miami and in Puerto Rico. And of course, this is the most fun part, I think, as an author, when you get together with friends and family and students and colleagues and then sign the books. This is probably the most rewarding part of the book process. Now, the two books presented a few unique challenges that I just want to comment briefly on, and then maybe end on a few lessons learned, which may or may not be relevant to some of the people on this Zoom call. The issue of whether the book is published in hardcover or paperback is quite daunting, and I know that the press does as much as it can, and particularly with the grant, the humanities grant that is able now to publish. Our book was published at the same time on paperback and hardcover. The Picture in Cuba book, however, took a couple of years, if I remember correctly. Once the hardcover edition had sold out, I guess, for $80, which is, of course, outrageous, and no students can buy that. Now it's in hardcover format as well. The Cuban Puerto Rico book, again, has been released in both. And that's a difficult decision, of course, both, I guess, for the press and the authors involved and editors, because we all want the book to circulate as much as possible, and especially to be used in classrooms. And I understand the difficulties of the financial difficulties of this decision. And I don't know that there's much that we can do as authors, except fight with the editor. Including photographs and paintings, particularly in Picture in Cuba, was quite challenging. We had, if I remember correctly, 48 different illustrations. So the task of getting the permissions and, sort of forcing each one of the collaborators and authors to get to that task took a lot of time. In the end, however, I believe that this particular book has great appeal precisely because it has so many illustrations in a book about art, which I had not done before. That's also, of course, a requirement. In the last book, I don't remember that we had a lot of trouble with the illustrations, except one photograph that took us, my co-editor and myself, quite a long time to send to the press so that it was publishable, because it involved a collage of different pictures from different sources. And again, our author, the main author of that book, wasn't responding very quickly to our demands. Commissioning an image for the last book was also quite interesting, because we wanted to use sort of a classic image of a bird with two wings, and the Puerto Rican flag and the Cuban flag on both sides. But that image actually is from a defaced and actually disappeared mural somewhere in Spanish Harlem. So then it was a difficult issue, first of all, because the image itself no longer exists, but also the picture that represented that image. I had no idea who the photographer was. So the press suggested that we commission a graphic artist and to do visual rendering of that. And I think it's a beautiful image that I'm very proud of. Finally, I want to mention the issue of working with a co-editor. In addition to the 18 or 20 people that contributed chapters, I was very pleased to collaborate with my colleague, Carmen Aide Rivera, from the University of Puerto Rico. But again, I have to confess that sometimes it was difficult to coordinate our respective perspectives, both as scholars, as well as personal schedules, etc. But in the end, I think we made it, and I'm happy that we worked together. One of the lessons that I learned from these two experiences, editing volumes is a hard, labor-intensive, but eventually rewarding work. I wouldn't recommend it to everyone. I think I myself have sort of done it several times, and I say I'm never going to do it again, but I do. But because, again, of all the various practical tasks that involve coordinating the work of others. But as I say, it is rewarding. After all, individually, these authors would probably not have published their work in this context, and we provide an opportunity for them to do so, and in a book form rather than individual articles. As I said before, working with multiple authors can be time-consuming, but it's very stimulating intellectually, especially when you cross disciplinary borders in the humanities and the social sciences. Marketing considerations such as titles and printing formats, etc., that I mentioned before, can be challenging and somewhat divorced from purely intellectual criteria. But I understand the need, of course, to sell the books to begin with, and that's why we go to university presses. So rather than publish them on our own, because that will be, I don't think it's a good option. I was very pleased with the constant support that I experienced throughout the process, from the beginning to the very end, and everyone involved in this. Some of them are on this call with us, and I think we couldn't have done it without all of you, especially at the end. When you have the copy editing process and the marketing, etc. But really, from the very beginning, I felt that the press was providing much needed advice. And finally, I just want to end by saying that overall, it's been a gratifying experience to work with the press and see the finished product in print, even if the process of publishing collective works like these two edited volumes that I focused on is sometimes very time-consuming, and you wonder why you do it at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Duany. I really appreciate your sharing those experiences, because the work of being a volume editor is quite different from writing your own book manuscript. And as you said, sometimes you wish you'd perhaps written that whole volume yourself. So thank you. That's great. It's hard to be the point of contact between the press and the contributors. I think it takes perhaps equal parts scholar, intellectual, author, administrator, and diplomat. So thank you so much. We've been talking a little bit about time management and different strategies. So I thought I would ask Dr. Young, you mentioned the time restraints, you have a heavy teaching load. I'm wondering if you might have some advice or some strategies for people who are either in the midst or contemplating working, and they have responsibilities in their professional life and their personal life, what sort of strategies have you found helpful to make time in your workflow for the research, writing, and revising?
Right. So yeah, thank you for that question. So at FAM, we were teaching, when I first came here, 4 to 5 courses per semester without a graduate assistant. And I think I had, in those early days, 4 intros and 1 upper level course, right? And so it was extremely time consuming. Again, in many ways, I'm just very thankful that the chair at the time, David Jackson, again, who was my mentor when I was a student at FAM, he worked with the faculty to make sure that he carved out space and time for us to be able to write. Now, we had to have the discipline to follow through. So one thing that he did for me, which, you know, was still very, very challenging, all my classes were on Tuesday and Thursday, right? And that was important for me because on those days that I was not teaching, especially Friday and Monday, I designated that time for my work. And I had to be extremely selfish about that time as well. That if I'm in the office with my door closed and a sign up, you know, that during that time, I'm really working on the book, right? It takes a lot of discipline. And unfortunately, even though you're getting pulled so many different directions, again, you have to be selfish during that process for the little bits of time that you have in order to make that happen. I'm also at a school that doesn't have many resources just in terms of like research budgets. I never had a personal research budget, right? Which meant that there were some things that you can compete for university-wide to maybe fund. Like it's a pool of money where you could fund to go a conference once every other year, or maybe the dean will be able to help you attend a conference. But in terms of conducting the research in particular, as well as attending conferences on a regular basis, but especially when it came to being in place to go and get the information from these other archives, a lot of that was just me investing in myself. And when I say investing in myself, I'm not just talking about it from an intellectual perspective, literally financing my trips back to Memphis, to other archives, competing for fellowships and other grants to help supplement it, but it was investing in myself. But I was extremely dedicated to getting to that point since day one, since I came back to FAMU. And that was because, you know, in grad school, I had a really sweet fellowship, didn't have to work, life was good. And I was recruited back to my alma mater because there was this huge turnover in our department. And we wanted to maintain the momentum that we had in terms of making sure that our students who wanted to go into doctoral programs were prepared. So I was recruited back specifically to teach researching and writing and making sure that those students were still equipped to go on to grad school. But when I told folks that I was going to take this job at FAMU, everybody was saying I was committing essentially career suicide. And they were saying that you don't want to go to an HBCU at the beginning of your career, you should go at the end because you will never be able to get your work out. And I took that personally. And so for me, that was the fuel that I needed, that I was going to do whatever it took in order for me to still serve the students who I wanted to serve, but also be in conversations with my peers at any institution. And as a result, you know, it's worked out, you know, now that I'm at this point, but you know, it was a huge sacrifice. So I would just say, be extremely disciplined, be diligent, be tenacious about your work, and to run your own race. You know, it's easy, especially in the social media world, to get caught up with what everyone else is doing at other institutions. People can publish left and right now, right? But run your own race, make the contribution that you want to make, and be satisfied with the work that you put out because you know what you did in order to get to that point. So that would be my 2 cents in terms of how I was able to overcome that, at least.
Thank you so much. Those are great perspectives.
And I see that Gazuzian book behind you as well, by the way.
We'll have a little show and tell afterwards, right? So we've been talking a little bit too about different types of books. Dr. Duany was talking about the work of an edited volume, being a volume editor for that. And Darius has shared some experiences from writing a monograph. I'm wondering, both of you have published scholarly articles. So I wonder if you would share some perspectives about how the processes with that genre may be different or what's similar. What are some things there that you might share with other scholars watching who are thinking about, you know, the work involved in writing a scholarly article and publishing that?
I can address some of the aspects of that process. Of course, for purposes of tenure and promotion in most academic institutions, it's the peer-reviewed articles that count the most, right? I mean, of course, you have to have 1 or maybe 2 books in order to get tenure, at least in the old system. We don't know what's going to happen in Florida in the future, but anyway, for now, that's sort of the way to do it. And so during the first 5 to 10 years, I think, you know, if scholars are looking forward to applying for tenure, becoming full professors, et cetera, they have to publish several articles in well-respected journals. And so, and of course, that depends on the field and depends on your topic. I remember when I first began my academic career, I was then in Puerto Rico, the publishing or perishing was not so important. It was the teaching, as in the case of Professor Young right now. But still, I mean, I was clear that I had to submit my work. In that case, of course, there were chapters from my dissertation or summaries of part of the dissertation that I thought might be relevant and interesting until I began another research project on a different topic. But in my case, I think it was critical as well to be able to publish in the mainstream journals as well as some of the more marginal journals. For example, I began to publish in a Dominican Studies journal in New York, which is now defunct. But it was important for me to reach that particular audience because I was working on Dominican migration at the time. Also, the language issue, of course, for US universities, all that counts really is English language journals because most of your peers and your committees are going to be reading English. But in my case, of course, publishing in Spanish was critical because much of the audience, of course, would have been Cubans, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, et cetera, and Latin Americans in general. So I tried to, as much as possible, to publish my own articles in English and Spanish in journals that I knew were going to be read in places like Venezuela, which, for example, had a very important journal for me, Nueva Sociedad, which is no longer published. But I did publish several articles. It was not an academic journal per se, but actually a sort of pseudo-academic social science journal, but it reached a much broader audience that was Latin American in scope, not just in Venezuela. So that's what I would say at this point. It is a different kind of strategy, but in the end, the goal is the same, right? If you want to secure tenure and promotion, as well as you know, make your work more readily available out there, especially for academic audience.
And yeah, I think my colleague is hit it right on the head. Only thing that I would add, the way that I view the differences is the journal articles are specifically for your discipline, right? They're not selling your journal article at Barnes and Noble, right? that it's going to these these members who are subscribing to that organization. So you're writing for that academic discipline, which means a lot more historiography in my case, a lit review. You see the jargon of the field more heavily in the journals, as opposed to when you're writing a book, you're in some ways shifting gears. You're still writing for the respect of your peers, be clear, right? That you still, when you're coming through an academic press, want the respect of your peers. But University Press of Florida is a business, right? That in the business of selling books. And you want a wide audience as well of individuals who can digest the work. And so, you know, Sean would say, that's great. You know, all of the authors, you know, who have written about this topic, but, you know, you could shift that somewhere else, right? Or maybe for the sake of this book, in order to make it tighter, we want to, for me, I'm more of a narrative historian, right? You don't want to disrupt the flow of the story that you're telling with this academic jargon or a lit review that can distract the reader who may not be a historian, but is very much interested in this person, Robert Church Jr., and the Black political struggle during the first half of 20th. They just want the information. So there are some differences, of course. Both are extremely beneficial to your career as scholars in the field, and hopefully you'll be rewarded for going through that process with tenure and promotion. Yeah.
Thank you both. Those are great perspectives. So we've been talking a little bit too, Dr. Young, you were just mentioning that the different type of approach. And I'm wondering about your first book was a revision of your dissertation, and now you have a new book project. I'm wondering if you find that there are aspects in developing a brand new book project that feel different or that surprise you perhaps from your first book experience. What is it like? Sometimes people are like, how do I start the second book project? Or I have 15 book ideas. Which one do I choose?
You know, yeah, it is, you know, to me, it's just a more freer experience, right? Because in many ways with the first book project, with it being a dissertation, again, you're writing for your discipline, right? During that dissertation, I mean, for your committee during that dissertation experience. And so when you're trying to craft that dissertation into a book, you're also, you know, having to go through this extremely rigorous editing process, because you can see how you would purposefully say, oh, this person does this. I had made sure I included that in the dissertation, but it doesn't necessarily flow. Like I remember, Sean, the first chapter, maybe first chapter and a half, I really talk about Church's father, right? And everything that he did. And you were like, you know, that's great, but we need to get to Junior, right? we need to kind of eliminate that. And I remember I had to really focus on 19th century work during my dissertation phase. Now you're at a point where you can write, you're purely writing the book that you want to write. And you're not necessarily going back and trying to deconstruct something that you needed in order to get those 3 letters, right? Now you have a presence, you know you can do it, which is another huge process and hurdle to get over. I've done it before, so I know I can do it again. But I can also tell the story that I want to tell without having to deconstruct a document that was serving a lot of different masters at one point. If that makes sense. Yeah. So that's been my process. That has been a free, and for me too, it's personal. I'm from Detroit, and you know, it's an opportunity for me to really engage with a place that helped shape and mold me to the person I am.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you so much. So I thought we'd shift gears for our final question, and think about peer review, because that's a part of the process that both of you have gone through as authors. So you've received reader reports on your own manuscript, but you've also served as peer readers on other people's manuscripts. I'm wondering if you might share a little bit of advice with other scholars from either role, that is, as someone receiving a manuscript report or someone writing one.
Yeah, let me say a few words about that. As a reviewer, I think the main issue, of course, is timing, right? And if you get too many requests for reviewers, and you can be swamped because of the multiple commitments that one has, teaching and doing research and committees, etc. So nowadays, I guess I'm getting older, and I'm getting a little more picky as to what reviews I commit to. So that, for example, anything in Latin America and the Caribbean perhaps is not sufficiently attractive to me to spend 2 weeks reading a manuscript and then suggesting some constructive criticism. So I try to focus on my own fields of expertise and migration studies, ethnicity, race, etc., because I think that's where I can make a contribution to that particular book manuscript, and then I decline otherwise if I can't do it, or suggest another reviewer. Now, perhaps more interesting in your question, Sean, is what do you do when you get the review and then you are faced with the task to reply and to comply with the request. I have to say that typically I don't like the reviews. My first reaction is, that person doesn't know what he or she is talking about. I normally don't know who the person is. So I get angry. I feel protective of my own work. But then a couple of days later, maybe a week later, I go back to the recommendation, say, actually, this is just, this is, I can handle this. I can add a footnote here, maybe change a word there. And then if I really have a problem with a particular substantive criticism, then of course, I have to explain to the editor why I'm not making that change. Normally, I think in most cases that I have been an object of review, it's not offensive, but I do think that many of us are protective of our work, and we think we're authorities on everything we write, which is true. But yeah, there's always room for improvement. So in the end, I wouldn't recommend to those potential authors spending too much time responding and sort of explaining why you're not doing whatever the reviewer asks you to do. The idea, I think, is to try to balance your own personal preferences with the hopefully constructive recommendations, as well as the editor's need to reconcile the two.
Yeah, you definitely have to find a balance, right? I think as an author, the first reaction when you get the reviews back, you're like, who did they send this to? Who is this person that has it out for me, right? Who did I anger in the field at some point? So you try to figure it out. I remember my first reviewer, it was very obvious, full disclosure, who had reviewed mine, because that person had kept referencing their book, right? Which was a great book, but it was like very clear, like, hello, I know who did this. But you are trying to find that balance. And I think too, it's important to kind of check your ego, right? And say, okay, you kind of take a deep breath with some of the criticism, and then you go back and see if I'm looking at this blindly, right? If I just was looking at this as a blind document without the emotional attachment that I have to this book that the world has been waiting for, right? Everybody's been waiting for this book on Robert Church Jr., right? Once I step back, you see what can actually, is this something that's going to make it stronger? And I think majority of the comments did make the book stronger from both of my reviewers. There were some things that you do kind of push back on, right? I mean, and you have that autonomy as an author as well, because you know the story that you want to tell, like, for example, Robert's wife died when they were very young, and they had a young daughter, and his sister basically raised his daughter. He's also a millionaire real estate magnate, right? And so on the tax records, they would say his sister was like a maid or housekeeper or something like that, which was clearly done probably for some tax reasons. And I remember the reviewer was insistent on me saying she was the maid. I was like, I'm not calling his sister the maid, right? Like, I'm just not going to do that at all, right? That was his sister who stepped up and reared his daughter while he was out traveling the world, right, doing his work. And so you have those moments where you say, okay, is this going to compromise something that I think is vital to understanding this story? And you explain that in your response. Yes, the reviewer mentioned this, but this is why I'm not addressing that issue, right? And you move on and you have conversations with the acquisition editor and see if that is a legit reason, and we move forward. So as a reviewer, again, it's about checking the ego. This book or this article is not about what I would write, right? But is this person making a credible argument? Is it supported? Does it factor in something that you think will make it a stronger book? But it's not from a perspective of this is what I would do if I was writing that book, right? And you kind of judge it for its own merit. Does this stand the historical test, right? In my case, is this a legit good book that has set out to prove what he or she is trying to accomplish with that work? So that's my approach. But the first thing is you're trying to figure out who's reviewing your work. That's the first thing that you do.
Awesome, thank you. It does take a village, and even when you get the comments you don't agree with, they help you sharpen the ones that you want to keep in there. So thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Romy.
Thank you to our editors, Stephanye Hunter and Sian Hunter, and to our guests, Jorge Duany and Darius Young, for sharing your experience and for your insights into the publication process. To our attendees, if you have any questions that were not addressed during this presentation, please reach out to one of our editors using the contact information shown on the screen and posted to the chat. This contact information will also be provided in an email to all webinar registrants next week. Don't forget our 1 o'clock panel, Career Paths in Humanities, Public Engagement, and Publishing. Please click the link in the chat to register for this panel. I also want to thank the UF African American Studies Program, the Center for Latin American Studies, and the Center for the Humanities in the Public Sphere for partnering with the University Press of Florida on this event. And thank you to the National Endowment for the Humanities for making this event possible through its grant program, Sustaining the Humanities through the American Rescue Plan. A recording of this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel, Florida Press. A link to the recording will be sent to all webinar registrants next week. On our YouTube channel, you can also view a recording of the first 2 events in this series, African Diasporic Arts and Social Change, and Race, Environment, Culture, and Political Ecology Across the Americas. To receive news and updates about the University Press of Florida and the books we publish, visit upress.ufl.edu/subscribe, or the link in the chat. And thank you for attending, and we hope to see many of you at our afternoon panel at 1 p.m. Thank you.